Okay, we're going to move on to the section on creating arrays plus plus. So in array basics, we've already looked at creating an array with just these square brackets and putting stuff inside of it. In create arrays plus plus, we're going to look at some different ways to create arrays. One of them is using a loop. If we want to have a lot of values, we could create an empty array and then loop however many times we want, in this case from 0 to 100, or 0 to 99, which is 100 times. And basically, I just use that push method that we learned about to modify arrays, and I can push exclamation or whatever I want to the end of the array. So it kind of builds the array one at a time. Push exclamation mark, push exclamation mark, push exclamation mark, loop, 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 loop. And at the end, you'll have an array with 100 exclamation marks inside of it. Okay, and of course, you can change how many times you want to loop and change what you're pushing to the end. This would give me identical values. We can also do the same algorithm, the empty array, and then loop. And we can push random values, right? So 500 loop 500 times and push 500 random values into my array. I could also get user input. Again, start with an empty array. I'm going to loop 5 times. And each time through my loop, I'm going to prompt the user for a color. And whatever they return, right, whatever they type in, I'm going to push into my array. So I can store 5 things or more, however many you want. And then you can even do patterns. Again, create an empty array, and this time use your loop. Don't just use your loop to repeat a set number of times. Use it to generate a sequence of numbers. So I'm going to start at 0. I'm going to count by 2s up to 50, and including 50, and then push my loop variable into the array. So it'll push 0, and then 2, and then 4, and then 6, and then 8, etc., all the way up to 50. Right? So these loops can help us create identical arrays, random arrays, an array of values from user input if we wanted to, and also a pattern. Okay, you can also take a string. So if you have a string, you can split that string up into different parts and store that into an array. So in this case here, we're going to split by comma. I think I actually didn't have to put the comma. I think that's the default value for this one, for the split method. But basically, it'll take this string, so name string, and split it with commas. And the result will end up being wherever there's a comma, it will remove that and separate what was ahead of it and after it into an element in the array. So each of these names separated by columns, or by commas, will become array elements. Same here, I can split by semicolons to get the list of numbers. If you do the empty space, right, there's a space in between here, or not the, sorry, yeah, a single space, it'll split by spaces. So you can break it up into words, right? And I think it would do it even if there was multiple spaces, I'm pretty sure. And if you do the empty string, okay, so just quotation, quotation with nothing in between, it splits it up into characters. So you'll actually get an I, a space, an L, an O, a V, an E, a space, an A, and R, right? So it does it per character if you do the empty space. So that's kind of useful if you want to get either loading from a file, right? Because when you get from a file, you'll get a string or an input element. The user can type a bunch of things in and you can split it into an array. Now we can also create an array from a file. There's a fetch API, fetch and then methods. So the fetch method says, hey, fetch this file for me. Once it's done loading the file, then I want to convert the data. And basically the fetch thing returns kind of this raw data, which I need to convert into, in this case, I'm going to convert to text, to a string. There's different formats you can convert it to, depending on what the file is storing. And then once the data has been converted, then we'll process the data. So this is kind of a synchronized thing. It first completes this task, then it'll run this function. And the fetch method will take the contents of this file and pass it into this function. So we store it in the raw data. And then the raw data will be converted into text, and that'll return from this function. So once that conversion is done, it'll then call the process data and return this text to the process data, which will be my data right here. And that should be now a string, which I'm going to split by /r/n, which is carriage return and new line. So when we read from a file with JavaScript, at the end of the file, or end of every line in the file, it contains these special /r/n characters. You don't see them, but they're there to denote go to the next line. So if we split by those characters, it should split the string by the end of a line. So this array, if I had I'm imagining a colors array where there's one color per line, right? If I split by the end of the line, the colors array should have one color in each element, right? And then this is kind of, I wrote it out this way just because I think it's easier to understand, right? Fetch this, then convert the data. Okay, good, do your job. Then process the data. Okay, do your job. And it splits that data and stores it in this global variable, colors array. Now, there's a more concise way to do it using arrow functions, fetch dot then, and we just define the function right inside of here with an arrow function. Here's a parameter, and then you don't even need the word return. Arrow functions, if it's one line, automatically return. And then same thing here, dot then, data, colors arrays, assign this. You just do that one line of code. So this is a little bit more of a concise way to do it. If you had more work to do here, maybe I'd keep it as a function so that it doesn't get too crazy. But you can also just turn this into do an open brace and a closing brace and do more lines of code in the processing the data section. Okay, another thing that we can do is create an array of HTML elements. In the past, we've only done document.getElementById. There's also something called query selector all. And this is cool because inside of this method, you just pass in a CSS selector. Any selector you want. So you could select all P elements, you could select all H2 elements, you could select all elements with the class special. You could even do a hashtag for an ID, and it would work the same as document.getElementById. But that would make sense because this is query selector all. So just use getElementById when you want to get an ID. Okay, but what this does, this query selector all, it returns something called a NodeList, which is similar to an array. It doesn't have the same functionality as an array, but it's, for our purposes, it's pretty similar, and we can do everything that we've learned so far with arrays with it. So once I do this query selector all, the special para elements will be an array or a node list of these elements. So I can loop from position 0 up to the length of this array, this node list, and I can access at position I, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and I could say add an event listener to each of the elements. Or if they were input elements, I could get their value and do something with their value, right? So it's kind of a neat way to query multiple elements on a page and store them in a node list, which is like an array. Okay, that was I just want to do a quick introduction of the notes here and kind of look at the new ways we can create arrays. Loops are very useful. Strings and files are handy, come in cool. Depends here if you have a form, right? You can, instead of prompting, remember here, I don't know, where was it? Up here, we prompted the user for a bunch of colors. We could have like a form with a bunch of input elements, and then we could just say, when you click a button, query selector all of those input elements, and store them in an array, and then you could loop to get their values. Something like that. Anyway, I'll do a couple more video lessons in this section on some examples of where we could possibly use this stuff. Okay, hope that made sense, kind of an introduction to this. Like I said, we'll do a few more examples where hopefully this will become more clear. And yeah, hope it makes sense. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.